Milk inside a bag of milk inside a bag of milk. Developed and released in August of this year by indie developer Nikita Kryukov, or Nikita Kryukov Publishing, if I have suffered the unfortunate faux pas of butchering the pronunciation of the developer's name, is an experience that you could call fascinatingly horrible. But I do mean this as a compliment. Depicted through a series of vivid red and purple visual novel panels, Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk is a very brief title, lasting a mere 10 to 15 minutes at most. But within those 10 to 15 minutes lies a story that can probably be best compared to a psychological horror. For those unfamiliar with the game, the simple premise is as follows. Help the girl buy milk. Also, to those unfamiliar with the title, I want to immediately stress that if you are a fan of indie or psychological horror, please consider stopping the video and play the game first. This review is going to be extremely spoiler heavy, and I strongly urge that you experience the game before continuing. The video will still be here waiting, the raw experience is a one-time deal and then it's gone for good. Which, for Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk, is worth it. As already touched on, the game takes you through a series of locations and scenes within an art style that I can only describe as ominous and uncomfortable. Every panel feels atmospheric and unnatural, with simple shots of either a fuel station or traffic lights appearing to be far more surreal and otherworldly than their real-life counterparts could ever hope to be. As for the gameplay itself, or as some will no doubt argue, lack thereof, the majority of the game takes place within the internal dialogue of the main character, who, although you never fully see or learn their name, you will come to be extremely familiar with in just a few short moments. It's clear from the very first opening lines of the game that this is a character suffering from some form of psychological illness. I'm on my way to the store, rehearsing the speech. I've been out for so long that I've forgotten what words they say when they enter the store. To a so-called normal person, walking to the local store to buy something is an act that requires next to no effort at all. It's a triviality, an insignificant moment of your life that you'd probably forget within 5 minutes of getting home. So, for the main character of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk, to place such intense importance on this action is something that immediately sets the tone of the game, especially when coupled with the opening soundtrack, a mixture of drones and hums that simmers threateningly underneath the character's nervously chirpy dialogue. It's also at this moment that the player is granted their first opportunity to respond. You are offered the choice of either questioning the character's mental stability by asking them who they're talking to, or simply dismissing the character's anxiety through a blunt command of "shut up and go." With the player having now seen this, the multiple outcomes of the game's scenes and conversations should be obvious. Each dialogue choice that you make will affect the outcome of either succeeding in the girl's objective to buy milk, or whether or not you will disappoint her. That is, to not provide the girl with the necessary support needed to get her from A to B. Now, for the record, you're not physically present within the game, and this is something that the main character makes very clear. If you choose to question who she's speaking to, the girl details that she has imagined herself to be a video game character, whereas you are the player literally reading her thoughts. Due to the additional scrutiny of her imagined scenario, in which the added pressure of another pair of eyes reading her internal narration will cause her to concentrate more, the girl hopes that this will then translate into remembering the previously mentioned speech that she's been memorizing, and ultimately aid her in her purchasing the milk. Unfortunately, this optimistic idea isn't exactly the catalyst of success that the girl's hoping for. She barely manages 3 words before completely faltering, freezing up and offering 3 pauses before finally admitting that she has forgotten what she wanted to say, or rather, what is far more likely, that she just simply didn't feel confident enough to say it out loud to herself. An irritation that clearly weighs heavily on her mind as she laments that this is in fact the 19th attempt to buy milk. Steeling herself for another try, the girl this time manages an additional word, which the player's only dialogue option is then to immediately mock. Wow, a whole word more. Of course, your only option is to select this response, something that you may not agree with. But here's the thing, it's not up to you. Throughout the following conversations until the end of the game, you can very much attempt to be a loving, supportive train of thought, offer all the right choices and hopefully succeed in encouraging her to buy the milk, but there are still moments within the game whereby you simply aren't given a choice. You can only respond with the knee-jerk reaction that the girl conjures from her head, and if this response is one that she can't help but feel, you are also forced into going along with it. And it's within these moments that milk inside a bag of milk inside a bag of milk starts to become very, very effective. Now, to clarify, I'm not going to be touching on the entirety of this game beat for beat. Every conversation can differ ever so slightly depending on the player's choice, and in spite of my spoiler warning, I still want to try and keep certain things hidden, just in case you should choose to play the game after watching this review. This is something I attempted with the similarly structured Speed Dating for Ghosts review, and the feedback I had from that video of people wanting to give it a try anyway was incredibly humbling. Thank you for that. But to come back to milk inside a bag of milk inside a bag of milk, there's certainly less game here compared to Speed Dating for Ghosts, but for what the title wants to achieve, this is more than okay. As the game continues, you essentially progress through instances of mental instability and psychological episodes. For example, directly after attempting to recite the script to herself, the player's dialogue choice surprises her with the realization that she has been walking with one foot on grass and one foot on the asphalt for a whole minute. Clearly an action made in distracted neglect whilst the girl focused on the script. Again, to a normal person, most probably wouldn't give a fuck, but to the main character of the game, she suffers something close to a breakdown through a severe episode of obsessive-compulsive disorder, completely freezing in place until she can determine how to balance her actions. As such, she's taken 50 steps on one side and 51 steps on the other, so to resolve the problem, she chooses to step backwards once and then move forward only on grass or pavement. She physically cannot bring herself to continue on both. And yet, even in spite of knowing how to resolve this issue, the girl still requires multiple instances of self-reassurance and explanation before she can even work up the confidence to act, even going so far as to state that she's about to start crying, and again the player's dialogue mocks her, first actually laughing at her before sighing irritably, and then even going so far as to insult her by calling her hopeless. In moments such as these, if the player is invested enough and buying into the game, these instances of forced mockery and ridicule feel genuinely cruel, going so far as to exasperate the player through a lack of having any real say in the matter. Which then becomes rather ironic, as the very same dialogue of the player feels similarly drenched in exasperation, as if the internal dialogue has been repeating these instructions on an endless loop and no longer seems to give a damn on how exactly they're received. Another more subtle indication of the girl's increasingly frequent instances of losing grip on reality is through one of the player's dialogue options, which states that the story is closing in an hour. But when the girl finally manages to get there and actually reach the aisle with the milk, there is now only 15 minutes left until the store closes. Now, sure, you're never offered an exact distance or an idea on how close the store is to her home, but it speaks to reason that a trip to buy something as mundane as fucking milk should not take 45 minutes. And yet it's taken the main character this amount of time to simply reach the shelf. She hasn't even mustered the confidence to buy the damn thing yet. It's also within the store that the game presents one of the most symbolic images of its short runtime, offered through a strange interaction with an odd bird-like figure who, no matter what the girl says, seems to be endlessly stuck on repeating the letter O. To this, the girl comments that she's genuinely terrified of the letter, and when pressed as to why, she shows you this. At first, being scared of a letter certainly seems a little unusual. You could even say that she's being silly, but there's a moment later on that calls back to it. Should you be successful in leading her home after buying the milk, the girl will stop for a moment at either a balcony or some form of stairwell. It's not exactly clear. She simply states that she stops on her floor and hangs by the railing, staring downward. She explains that in doing this every day, she no longer feels afraid of heights. In fact, the ritualistic action of repeating this has in fact allowed her to enjoy the silence. Except it doesn't end there. The girl then goes on to explain that when experiencing the effects of medication, terrible and unpleasant melodies sound in her head, a statement that becomes all the more frightening when you learn exactly why she has become the way she is. Before I get into this, I'm going to offer one last spoiler warning. This is the final reveal of the girl's story, and it directly ties into an ending that honestly left me feeling extremely uncomfortable. I'd also like to offer a warning that this section of the review does deal with a topic that is sensitive in nature. Continuing on, should you be successful in encouraging the girl to buy milk, she will make her way back home while still talking to herself. During this conversation, she comments on the fact that she sees other people as monsters, but also admits that in spite of all of her psychological troubles, she's not afraid of them. In fact, she suspects that they are the ones who are truly afraid, a notion that she finds a little strange. After this, she asks that the player not question what happened to her, and even goes so far as to repeatedly ask the player to promise that they won't. In response to this, you can either type yes or no, but she will only allow you to continue if you type yes in block capitals. Again, further utilizing player frustration and exasperation of repeatedly saying the same thing over and over to further amplify the symbolic irritation that she herself must feel when spiraling out of control. Once eventually satisfied with your answer, however, she will then immediately shrug off this interaction with a comment that, after all, she's only talking to herself, the incident would have come up sooner or later, so ultimately avoiding it is pointless. After which, she then recalls an image and asks the player a question. What do you see? I'll be honest, I sat looking at this for a good long while. The shape and splatter were clear indications of something violent or gruesome, but by that same notion, the surreal art style made distinguishing any true detail quite difficult. It seemed to be something of a Rorschach test, but whilst a Rorschach is often perceived to be a mixture of one or two images through ink blots, the image presented by the girl lacks almost all possible definition. You're allowed to type your answer. I typed blood. She responds that it is her father, or rather, some of him, having thrown himself from a window. The girl explains that her family is difficult, but in spite of this, she never expected him to end it in the manner that he did. And after experiencing this tragedy, she recalls suffering a long gap in her memory, having clearly broken down in either shock or despair. The girl then explains that today is the first day in a long time that she's been able to buy milk or do anything else trivial without what she describes as a serious incident, clearly recalling instances that most likely led to her wondering if the people around her are in fact the ones truly afraid. Of course, the girl's terrible memory also further contextualizes the previously mentioned O, or rather her tendency to stop by the railings and stare downward. Her fear of heights has been erased by an obsessive urge to keep doing this, almost as if imagining the experience of the very same form that claimed her father, which, if anything, seems to be growing more and more present in her mind while she enjoys the silence. It's been very clear from the start of the game that she doesn't exactly get a whole lot of that. Her mind is always full of noise and constantly speaking to itself. And the fact that she seems most at peace when in this moment really speaks volumes. And finally, leads directly into the final scene of the game. One that I honestly find really difficult to talk about. This scene was genuinely one of the most uncomfortable moments of fiction that I can recall witnessing in the last few years. The silence throughout this short yet extremely effective exchange of dialogue speaks absolute volumes to the nature of the two characters' relationship. As for the depiction of the mother, I have to hold my hands up and say that it honestly scared the shit out of me. The soulless expression masquerading as a kindly smile was so extraordinarily unnerving, and coupled with the slow, cold delivery of the simple question of, "Did you bring milk?" Not even preluded with a simple greeting, it felt so fucking emotionless. It's as if since the death of the father, the mother has grown so tired of her daughter's psychological issues that every sentence or act of speaking to her is one that takes an extreme amount of effort, as if the mere idea of talking to her daughter exhausts the mother, and indeed she would rather not see her at all, simply commanding her to go to bed with not even a single word of gratitude, only a question of, "Did your new medicine help?" Again, not, "I'm glad to see you," not, "I'm glad to hear it helped." Just go to bed. So she does. I can honestly say that I was surprised by this game, and again, many I'm sure will argue that it's hardly a game at all, it's a visual novel, and sure, it is. But it's a damn effective one. I don't know if it's my own past history perhaps had a little something to do with it, but milk inside a bag of milk inside a bag of milk hits me in a way that I find very rare, to a degree that genuinely made me feel uncomfortable. The idea of being so caught up and trapped in your own head to the same degree as this character is a situation that terrifies me, and I wouldn't be surprised if anyone else suffering similar episodes feels the same way. As an exploration of the psychological horror that mental illness can impart on someone, I applaud this game, and I'll probably be thinking about it for a long time. So, if any of what I've said has had an effect on you in even the slightest way, go play Milk Inside a Bag of Milk Inside a Bag of Milk.